So the Porsche 996 has always been the sort of awkward middle child of the Porsche 911 range. It slots in right between the Porsche 993 and the more modern Porsche 997. I've always viewed the Porsche 996 as a sort of weird adolescent phase 911 car with some weird features and things on the exterior which just looks a little bit strange, but it all comes together in sort of weird way. Nowadays, big car reviewers like Doug DeMuro actually states that this is the best 911 car ever. And Matt Watson from CarWow actually bought one for his own personal use. So I'm quite interested to see what all the fuss is about. So one of the most controversial aspects of this car are these headlamps. The standard 911s all have the standard round headlamps, and this 996 version was a car that came out with these sort of cracked egg style headlamps, which a lot of 911 enthusiasts hated actually. This little part over here was a sort of orange, I think, in the pre-2000s 996 generations, and it really made it look like a cracked egg. To me, I'm not too put off by these headlamps. I think, yeah, it's like part of a certain era of 911. It's not really that ugly to me. Then looking down from the headlamps, you'll see these actual air intakes here at the bottom that go straight to the radiator. These aren't fake. I think in the early 2000s, the whole fakeness thing about the fake air vents didn't really materialize, I think only until the later 2000s. So it's quite nice to see that they're actually real. Then looking at the color of this car, it's quite a very nice color. It's this sort of navy blue grayish color. I think it's quite a dark day today. The sun's not really out, so you can't really see the blue pop that much, but I think it really suits the car very well and the whole shape of the car. I really like it. So when looking at the side of the car, one of the coolest things you'll see on this car probably are these wheels. I really love the way these wheels look. It's the classic 911 Porsche for me from the early 2000s. Below the wheels you see these red Porsche brake calipers, which also looks really nice. I think the red color contrasts this navy gray color very, very well. Obviously the Porsche logo in the middle, and yeah, it's just a very, very good looking wheel. So looking at the rear of the car, I think this is probably one of the most beautiful angles of this car. This back 3/4 view of it, you'll see these bulges, wheel arches, which I think suits this car extremely well. You'll also see this big tail lamp, this big red strip here, which I think looks really, really cool, especially for this era of car. They're also doing it with the modern 911s nowadays also, where they have this rear strip which looks like Robocop's visor. I think I've said that before, but I think it looks really, really cool. You'll then see the Carrera 4S logo with that classic Porsche font, which I think looks really nice. And then above that you'll see this little like grill part here at the top, which is obviously where the engine is. So let's pop that and see how it looks. So opening up this little engine bay compartment, you'll see the 911's engine bay. We'll not see really much. This hosts the 3.6 litre flat six Porsche engine, which is somewhere inside there, and you can see some of what's happening here. But obviously being a Porsche, you won't see the whole engine, but I think it's still pretty cool that you at least can see some of it. You'll see obviously where you can up the oil there, which is probably the only reason they actually open it up. So while the engine compartment is open, let's take a listen to that flat six exhaust note. So looking below the tail lamps of this car, you'll see these exhaust pipes. It's really, really nice to see these actual exhaust pipes incorporated to this chrome piece over here. That's something you don't really see at all in modern cars nowadays, so it's really nice and refreshing to see that. So sitting in the interior of the 911 Porsche 996 4S Cabriolet, the first thing that you notice is in how great condition this interior is. This is the black leather option, which obviously everything is covered in black leather, and it really, really looks extremely good for its age. I mean, it's 16 years old now, 17 years old now, and this leather looks amazing to touch. It feels good. This Porsche Stuttgart logos here on the seats looks absolutely in pristine condition. They might have been redone before, but I think the quality of everything just looks really, really well. The steering wheel looks perfect. This dashboard feels nice. Everything just feels very, very well put together. I've played around with some of the buttons here on the center console as well, and this little knob for the windscreen wipers. It feels brand new, and it just feels so sturdy. Like there's nothing that can go wrong with it, which is something you can't really see for a lot of cars, and even German cars from the early 2000s. So for me personally, I think I really like this interior. Seats very, very comfortable. I think they don't hug you too much. They're just right. I think it sits. Yeah, they're very, very comfortable. On the right hand side here, you'll see some pocket storage area in the door where you can store some things. This interior is put together extremely well, and it's very, very German. An example of this would be shocks that's actually in the Cabriolet. If you open it up, it's got two little shocks here, which is crazy for a car. I mean, that's usually used to open up your bonnet or whatever, so it's crazy to see that in a Cabriolet. It's got an infotainment screen as well, which is one of Porsche's first. I mean, it's a color screen, which is quite nice to see. I'm not really sure how it would stand up to the modern infotainment screens nowadays, but it's cool to see that they actually did it. The buttons and things actually looks very very similar to the modern Porsches nowadays. The color schemes they still use, which is quite interesting to see. I thought they would have changed it up, but it looks really quite modern still. Then below the screen, you'll see buttons for your main, your audio, sound, telephone, email, info, trip computer, and navigation as well. This is still one of those navigation systems that you need to insert a navigation CD or DVD. And then below that, something that is really cool is this little like CD holder area. So it's got 4 CD holders that pops up where you can actually store CDs, and you can just pop that open and take out your favorite CD and then listen to it, which is something that's really, really crazy. It's not even a CD. You can't listen to these CDs. It's just physically to keep them in the storage compartment, which is quite cool. And below that, you'll see 2 screens for your temperature controls, which is nice to see. It's really plain and simple. Your air conditioning and temperature controls to show up or down or hot or cold. And then one of the main things about a 911 is the manual shifter. So in the middle, you'll see this sort of thinnish boot-looking manual shifter, which is a quite interesting look. I'm not a big fan of how the shifter looks, but I can promise you it feels really, really nice, and it's great to see a manual shifter in a Porsche 911. Then below the shifter, you'll see some buttons for your windows controls, front and back, and you'll see a little ashtray here. Obviously, everyone smoked in the early 2000s, so why not have a little ashtray there? And then also you'll see the center console storage compartment here with a lock, so it's closed now. We actually use the car's lock to pop it open, and you just stick it in and it pops open, which is something, for some reason, extremely satisfying to do. I'm going to do that again. Really enjoyed that. But yeah, it's just goes with the Cabriolet. The whole German build quality of this car is really nice. Something also to notice, this car does have a Bose sound system, which is really cool to see in a car like this. Not that you need sound, because that flat 6 sounds amazing, but yeah, if you want to listen to some good music, it is there. I just really love the interior of this car, and it's a lot better than I actually expected. One more thing inside here, also another very German over-engineered thing, which I quite like, is this cup holder that you press. It pops open like this, and then this little arrow here, which you can actually feel with your thumb. They made it so you can feel it, and you just pull it out, and there's a second cup holder, which is really over-engineered, but the fact that it still works 17 years later just shows you how good the build quality is. Then looking at the steering wheel, which is something you'll see most of the time, it's a really nice and simplistic look. There's no buttons on here. It's got the nice Porsche logo in the middle and your horns and an airbag logo, and that's pretty much it. It feels very, very nice to hold in your hands. It feels not too big or too small. I think it actually feels quite well and nice and grippy, which is all you really need in a 911. It is a driver's car after all. And looking at the front, you'll see your dials. You'll see in classic Porsche standards, you'll see the rev counter in the middle, which is the most important thing, that revs all the way up to 8,000 RPMs. I think this car makes full power at 6,800 RPMs, if not mistaken. On the left, you'll see your speedometer up to 300 kilometers per hour, which is great to see. On the left from that, you'll see your battery. And then on the right, you'll see your fuel temperature gauge or your oil temperature gauge. You'll see your fuel levels and things like that as well on the right hand side, which is very important for a 911. Obviously, if you go to a racetrack or you want to race the car, you want to see what your oil temperature is like most of the time. So I really like the white dials as well with the little red needles. That's very Porsche, and I think it's great that they use them here. So the Porsche 911 996 Carrera 4S, what's it like to drive? Well, let's start off with the specs of this car. So this car has 315 horsepower. It's got 370 Newton meters of torque, which in modern days, like a lot of older cars, doesn't sound like much. However, this car weighs 1.47 tons, which is extremely light for a sports car, and especially a car of this size. So it's a very lightweight car, and considering the power to weight ratio of 315 horsepower for something less than 1.5 tons, it's actually very, very good. So seeing that the power to weight ratio is so good, that means this car is really, really, really fun to drive. The party piece of this car, of course, is this beautiful manual gearbox. That shifts so smoothly for a car that's 17 years old. It's really unreal how fun it is to drive this car and how smooth it shifts. The revs, of course, that was also really smooth. I mean, it revs like a brand new car. You know, you always hear people rave about Porsche 911s and why it's the best car ever made and why it's the ultimate sports car. And you know, this not being the most favorite one of the 911 range, it still to me is such a beautiful car to drive. Let's just rev it out a little bit. Up at the third. Oh, that flat 6. The noise it makes, it's just really good. Wow, this is a real fun car to drive, and you can feel it's a pure driver's car. So looking some more at the specs of this car does 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in 5 seconds flat, and it does a top speed of 280 kilometers per hour, which is actually quite fast for a car this age. Hence why obviously the speedometer goes all the way to 300, but it's quite nice to see there's no limiters involved or anything like that. I have to just reiterate how great this manual gearbox is. I think if I were to take one thing out of this car, it would be the manual gearbox. It is so unbelievably good and smooth. It's just something you want to use all day and every day, and would be the reason why you get into a car like this and just go for a drive. I would also say one of the reasons people really didn't like this car, disliked it, I think it was the first Porsche 911 that came out with a water-cooled engine, whereas all the previous purist Porsches were all air-cooled. This was something quite controversial. I personally, obviously not being a purist or a Porsche purist, have a problem with a car that has a water-cooled engine, so not really an issue for myself, but I know that's something that puts off purist Porsche enthusiasts. We've got a nice little stretch of road coming up. Let's drop it down to second. In the corners you can really feel that four-wheel drive system work. You don't have the fear at all of one of the rear end slipping out, which was always a thing about Porsches, and in this car you just don't have that. Oh, that noise that flat 6 makes is just absolutely enticing. Just pushes you to go faster and faster, but obviously public roads, so won't go as fast. So I always like to think about the pros and cons of a car before I buy a car, especially an older sports car like this, because usually there's a lot more cons than buying a new car than there are pros. So firstly, let's look at the cons of buying a car like this. So this car is 17 years old, so it's not the newest car. The Porsche 996s were quite infamous for something called the IMS shaft bearing, which I'm not entirely sure exactly what it is or what it does, but I know that your engine can explode if that's not taken care of, which is obviously something that most people would not want to happen. So if you get that fixed quite early on, that issue will go away completely, which is quite nice. So I would recommend, if you're looking to buy one of these, make sure that you have the IMS shaft bearing repaired. Another issue that's quite more obvious is obviously the exterior looks of this car. So this car obviously have the egg-shaped headlamps, which isn't ideal. Most other 911s do not have that, or all other 911s don't have that. They have the classic round-shaped headlamps. So that is something you need to consider. You're never going to have the round-shaped headlamps of other 911 cars, but if that's something that doesn't bother you, then that's fine. Pros of this car. Let's start off with the 3/4 rear end of this car. If you're talking about looks, it looks really good. Some car reviewers claim that it's one of the best looking rear ends that they've ever seen. I'm not entirely sure about that, but that's one of the things that people have said about this car. Another thing about this car, and I think the most important thing about this car, is the price of this car. So this car retails for 570,000 Rand, which if you think about it, it sounds like quite a lot of money for a 17-year-old car. But compared to a Porsche 993, which is, you're talking about something that's probably 10 years older than this car and has at least twice the amount of kilometers on the clock. This car is 69,000, by the way. Will cost at least twice the amount of money as well, way over R1 million, close to 1.5 million Rand, which is absolutely crazy. So to summarize, if you are in the market for a 911 and you're looking to not spend a ton of money and you don't really care about the looks of the car per se, it's still a good looking car, but it's not as good looking as the other 911s, I can definitely recommend this car. Make sure you have a little bit of money set aside for if something happens like the IMS bearing fails. Otherwise, just make sure you get that treated and fixed before you even buy the car. Thank you very much for watching the review. I'm going to drive a little bit more.